Yeah, we've also sometimes put this out on YouTube afterwards, so that others can access it. But yeah, Florian is running a project that's ERC funded called Rusinform on the consequences of the internet for Russia's informational influence abroad. And what he's presenting today is part of that project, which he has co-authored with Julia Kling, who's also here, who's doing her PhD with Florian and also working on that project. And another co-author who's not with us today is Pascal Jürgens from the University of Trieste, who's Professor of Computational Communication Research. Sorry, University of Trier, not Trieste. But their presentation is titled Entertainment Interspersed with Propaganda, How Non-News Accounts Deliver Explicitly Political Content to Mass Audiences on Russia's most popular social network, VKontakte. So I'll pass the floor to Florian, who will share his presentation.
Yeah, thank you, Lone, for that very kind introduction. I will try to share my screen now. Just wait. Yeah. Okay, can you see my screen now?
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you very much for this kind invitation. And as I saw that this is a slightly broader format, I decided to divide my talk into two parts. And one is on my broader research agenda and the Rusinform project. And the other part is on this specific study, which you already mentioned, Lone. And so these are the two parts of my talk today of approximately, I guess, 25 minutes. So firstly, my research agenda. My research agenda is largely focused on the ERC-funded Rusinform project since 2019. And Rusinform is a 6-year ERC consolidator project on the consequences of the internet for Russia's informational influence abroad. And it is comprised of 6 researchers, and one of them is Julia Kling, who is here today with us. And you can find the research outputs at the project website and on our Twitter handle. And if you're interested, we're also organizing a one-day pre-conference to the biannual ICRIA conference in Ljubljana in September 2024 on the informational influence of autocracies abroad. And we have a lineup of 15 speakers on the topic. So if you're interested, please feel free to be in touch and participate also as a guest. So in the Rusinform project, we broadly deal with Russia's foreign propaganda network. And before I start, I would like to give you an overview of what we consider this network to be. And at the center of it, there are, of course, Russia's 2 official foreign communication channels, RT and Sputnik. RT reports in 7 languages, Sputnik in approximately 30 on a range of platforms. And then we have also Russia's covertly supported news websites. And one of the most prominent here is arguably Newsfront, which has connections to the secret services. But also recently we had this scandal around the website Voice of Europe, which falls in a similar category. Other classic channels are the social media accounts of officials, such as embassies, and also Kremlin-controlled culture institutes and think tanks, both in Moscow and abroad. Then we have co-opted foreign political, economic, media, and also academic elites. We have Kremlin-controlled platforms as the social network VK or the search engine Yandex. We have Russia's domestic media and the Russian-speaking audiences abroad, which are conceptualized by the Kremlin as so-called compatriots, and thus is a key target audience for these efforts. Then we have the simulation of online public opinion in troll factories. We have the special services, which might stage protests or other offline events in foreign countries, we have cybercrime and hacking, we have transnational repressions, and we probably could go on with a few other nodes, but these are probably the most important. So in the RusInform project, we have looked at a couple of these nodes, and just to present a couple of recent results, we have a study in which we find that half of the leading so-called alternative media outlets in Germany have one of three types of connections to the Kremlin. And here we theorize organizational, media, and personal connections. And the paper is recently been out in the International Journal of Press and Politics. A second study we have, or a series of studies, is on search engines as mediators or intermediaries of the Kremlin's propaganda. And for instance, we have a study where we find that searching for COVID-related search terms in May 2020 in Belarus, that is from Belarus, compared with Google, Yandex retrieved significantly more conspiratorial content, and this content close to exclusively suspected US bloggers to be behind the pandemic, even though the coronavirus spread from China. So we have this paper in journalism, and we have also a paper or a doctoral student who works on Russian speakers in Germany as a key target group of the Kremlin. And here we have conducted a semi-structured interview with 42 first-generation migrants in Germany. And we, for instance, find that two distinct understanding of truth played a pivotal role in how our participants negotiated trust in the transnational news environments. And that was truth as a category grounded in factual evidence, and truth as non-evidence-based category grounded in values, emotions, or identities. And finally, we have the leading Russian network VK as a keynote in this network. And here we find that on the leading Russian, on VK entertainment accounts that sprinkle in explicitly political information, or what we conceptualize as such, attract at least 7 times more followers than legacy news accounts. And here, this is a paper that is under review, and that is this work in progress. And that's why I look very much forward to discuss it with you in some detail. So this is the second part of my talk, where I will talk about entertainment interspersed with propaganda on VK. So to give you some background information, VK is frequently referred to as the Russian counterpart of Facebook. It has a similar interface, and it is a Kremlin-controlled platform. It has been gradually appropriated by the Kremlin in the past 10-15 years. And now the chief executive officer is Vladimir Kirilenko, who is son of the first deputy chief of staff of Russia's presidential administration. That is, the connections to the Kremlin are rather explicit. And VK's audience increased after Russia's full-scale invasion, also because Western platforms have been labeled as extremist organizations. So VK has now, according to its own data, approximately 50 million daily users as of March 2022. VK remains popular in Russia and slightly less popular also in other post-Soviet states, and it has been blocked in Ukraine and Latvia after Russia's full-scale invasion. So what is the state of academic research and the research gap we would like to address? So if you look at extant political communication research on news consumption on VK, then we have to say that it is very scarce. There are only a very small number of studies in the past decade. These studies were all conducted prior to Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, and they have concluded that most users avoid classic news on VK by not following legacy news accounts. So Urman in 2018, for instance, found that only 15% of her sample, randomly drawn sample, followed a VK page of one of the major Russian media sources or blogs. So we could ask the question, is VK a platform that is at all relevant to the Kremlin's propaganda and political communication scholars at all? So is it relevant for us to study it if so few people follow news accounts, or is this exclusively an entertainment platform? So we asked, to what extent and through what types of accounts were Russian language VK users potentially exposed not to news, but to political messages of some kind, approximately 8 months after Russia launched its full-scale war against Ukraine? So the goals are at a more abstract level to broaden the scope of analyzed political communication accounts beyond news accounts, so to look what happens beyond the news on VK. We also wanted to investigate Russian language political communication on VK post-February 22, and we wanted to advance academic thinking on how authoritarian leaders can interweave propaganda and entertainment on SNS. Because if you look at it, it's not so easy to find content that you want to look at, because what is political content if you go beyond news? It can be anything, you know, it can be history, it can relate to current affairs, to schools, to any kind of topic. So we came up with a definition of, or with a concept of explicitly political content, and we defined it as content that centers on key political decisions taken by the autocrat on current affairs. So the potential benefit here is clear for the autocrat. He can gain some persuasive effect. But then we also have unrelated content that covers topics that are not at all related to political decision making. For instance, cute animals, lifestyle advice, and so on. And here the distinction is rather clear. And also this type of content, as has been underlined in propaganda research, of course, has potential benefits because it can be used to open up channels of communication and build trust with audiences that can be then used to deliver political content. And in between, we theorize implicitly related content that does not touch upon key current issues, but still serves propagandists by implicitly promoting their values, worldviews, or historical narratives. And of course, this concept aims at fostering ideological frameworks in which the explicitly persuasive claims then can resonate and make sense. So this is one part of our theoretical contribution. And then we embed this distinction between explicitly and unrelated content, which you here see on the left, in a three-dimensional framework. And in this framework, we visualize how autocrats can interweave entertainment in order to increase the efficacy of their propaganda efforts along 3 dimensions. And autocrats can leverage entertainment along 3 axes, which are not mutually exclusive, but can be combined in propaganda efforts. For instance, as we have seen, autocrats can use more or less explicitly related messages. For instance, they can also use unpolitical content to connect with their audiences. And along the second axis, autocrats can not only operate information channels on social networks, but can also use a wide range of non-information, more entertainment-oriented channels. And along the third axis, they can decide, or propagandists can decide, to present content in a factual, unemotional style or in an entertaining style. And the idea here is that you can locate any social media post in this typology, and you can use this typology to describe what type of social network content you look at in your study. For instance, in our study, we looked at explicitly political content, which could, however, be presented both in a factual and entertaining style, and it could appear in all types of information or non-information channels. And so the focus of the study I present to you today is the blue plane visualized in this analytical framework. So what did we do in our study? In October 2022, Julia and 2 research assistants went through the VK directory from top to down across several content, and they looked at all accounts that had more than 100,000 followers, and they looked if they published explicitly political content regularly, and we defined regularly as every 3 days, at least every 3 days in the last month. And in the end, we came up with 355 such EPC accounts. So we had these 355 accounts that have more than 100,000 followers approximately. And we performed 2 types of data analysis. One was qualitative, grounded theory informed. And in this approach, we developed a 6-fold typology of these accounts. And then we proceeded with a quantitative coding effort, and we coded to which of these six types these 355 accounts belonged, and we also registered their followership sizes in a first step. And here is what we found. We found 6 types of accounts, and the first type is these legacy news accounts, and these are this is the type of account that has been scrutinized in prior research. So they present at least imitate Western-style journalism, and there's an editorial office that operates the account. But then we also found a second type of account, which is SNS-only news account, and this is a kind of shadowy account because they look very similar to legacy news accounts, but their editorial office are unknown. There is no reference to editorial office, and there's no information who operates them. And I, for instance, I did not know any of these accounts, even though they had large followerships. Then there were war-focused accounts. They also operated only on social networks. There were organization accounts, such as government organizations, or also accounts by the Kremlin-controlled political parties. Then we had author-focused accounts. These were accounts operated by bloggers and their teams, but by identifiable VK users. And we had entertainment-focused account as a last category. And their authors were often unknown too, and they focused mostly on entertainment content in contrast to the other channels. So at this stage, we already knew that the 355 accounts that disseminated explicitly political content were of these 6 types. So this is the kind of EPC information universe on a VK. But then we wanted to know more because we wanted to also know about the audience sizes. That's why we aggregated followerships. And so we simply registered in a first step the followership of each account, and then we aggregated them, and we looked at how many accounts of each type we had. And this is the result table. And I do not want to discuss all numbers, but I would like to point you to the fact that we have 2 pictures from outside Russia and from within Russia, as 8 accounts are restricted in Russia. So the picture is not too different, but it is different. And I want to point you to 2 numbers. And the first number are these, and they basically indicate that the aggregated audience of legacy news accounts is 33 million non-unique followers, and the aggregated audience of these entertainment-focused accounts that spread explicitly political content is 239 million followers. So you have almost 7 times more followers that potentially receive EPC through these entertainment accounts than those that could receive EPC through legacy news accounts. If you look now from within Russia. The second figure I wanted to point you to is this 96-97% figure, and this basically indicates the the percentage of Kremlin uncritical information. So 69% or 96 or 97% approximately of the followerships can be assigned to accounts that don't disseminate critical information of the Kremlin. So it's mostly uncritical EPC that we find on VK or that circulates on VK across all these accounts. And the third figure is that these SNS only news accounts, they are also interested because they have only slightly less followers than the legacy news accounts that everyone knows, so they are also important as a kind of second news universe on VK. And these are in essence the results of our first study. And now we went on to download for a second study the 26 million followers through the API of VK, which is rather open and comparable to Twitter in its most researcher-friendly times. So we had this 26 million followers, and based on this data, we can now create followership networks in the next study. And some of the interesting findings, there's a preview here. The right circle here is a cluster of the classic Russian news media on VK. They are mostly Kremlin controlled by now, but this is classical audience network. And then we have the second circle. These are users that apparently seek to avoid the classic news outlets, the classic Kremlin-controlled news outlets, and they follow these seemingly non-classic or non-legacy outlets. And then we have this third blue cluster up here, the largest cluster, that follow the entertainment accounts, and they seek to avoid all types of news. But the interesting thing is, and what they have in common is that they all receive explicitly political content through either through entertainment, through SNS only news, or to one of the other news accounts. And I mean, to give an impression how entertainment is sprinkled in here on these entertainment accounts, you might have eight posts on the typical entertaining content, and then you have one post about Putin or about the mobilization or whatever current affairs topic. So this is how it works here in this blue cluster of entertainment accounts. So to finalize, to come to an end with my presentation and to summarize three final statements. In this study, we firstly propose a threefold typology of how autocrats can interweave propaganda and entertainment on social networking sites. And secondly, we argue that in order to assess the circulation and impact of propaganda on social networking sites, researchers should broaden their empirical focus and at least aim to consider not only news, but also explicitly political content about current affairs. And thirdly, and empirically, we can show that on VK, entertainment accounts are a key gateway for predominantly uncritical political content to mass audiences. And with these conclusions, I would now like to conclude and look forward to your questions. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Florian. That was super interesting. I will give people a few minutes to think of their questions. Overall, just to say, the initial picture of different Russian propaganda channels that you're looking at is really quite frightening. How do you deal with studying this kind of stuff just on a personal level? I would find that quite difficult without getting paranoia.
I mean, it's to be honest, it's difficult, you know, and it's. I mean, Julia, maybe you can say a word how. I mean, because you went through all the channels and we discussed it in the team. Yeah, please, Julia, would you like to have a word?
Well,
some other words.
Yeah, I would like to tell you to the audience as well what your answer is, but I think well, we're in a war situation, so I guess it's kind of important. There's also an idea, or well, I think it's a must do, and so besides the research that is interesting, I think there's also kind of a need to do that kind of research. So yeah, word to you back, Florian.
Yeah, I think, yeah, of course, there are standard ways of doing it, focusing on your family, trying to read other stuff. I mean, turning off the news in the evenings. And yeah, this is probably the most important thing. It's sometimes hard to bear because it's such a stream of negative news, and always, when you think it can't get worse, it gets worse. It gets worse in the course of the past 2 years, and it's also yeah, that's probably. It's a complex issue. In the end, I mean, I know that some organizations have psychological teams that speak with misinformation and disinformation researchers, but we haven't consulted psychological assistants.
Yeah, no, it's a tough one. I found the same thing with studying populism sometimes, to always be immersed in this dark world.
But I think it's important that people study it, because I think what we have seen in the past is that these issues remain under-researched because they are so unpleasant to study. And I can see, I think you can see this as a pattern in research, also with rightist movements. I mean, they are dangerous, you get threats, and I mean, it's just more pleasant to study other aspects. And that is why I think I kind of feel a responsibility to continue.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and we kind of do what we do because we want to, I guess, make the world a better place, right? So good. Okay, well, feel free to put your cameras on and raise your hand or put something in the chat, and I'm happy to take questions.
I can also show 2 or 3 screenshots if you're interested in the entertainment.
Yeah, that would be great.
Let me see if I can share this additional materials. So this is, for instance, a screenshot from our supplementary file, and it's the background image of one of these entertainment accounts that is called Russia is Everywhere, wherever there are Russians, and this is focusing primarily on patriotic entertainment content. And it essentially transports this ideology of the Russian world, that the Russian territory is confined by the places where Russians live. And here you have, I mean, jokes about these issues. And here you have another account with more explicit political content. It's about Zelensky, and it's one of the even nicer ones, I would say, because here is Zelensky has at one point asked Putin to enter the ring with him to solve the question like real man, and the author of this propaganda account says, "I would not scatter words like that. After all, Putin was a judoka in the past." This is this kind of also post that we identified. Or here is one that says nothing unusual, just a weather forecast in Poland. And the subtitle here is, there we are now, they are starting to divide Ukraine. This is essentially because the Kremlin-controlled media frequently accuse Poland of planning to conquer Ukraine or parts of Ukraine. So these are a couple of examples that I have prepared.
Yeah, super interesting to see the variety.
Yeah.
We have a question from Darren.
Hello. Thank you, Florian. Great presentation. Really interesting work on something I've only got a vague sort of knowledge of in a way. One thing I was wondering about was targeting. Are there any particular groups of users, I guess, to start with? Because that might answer the question anyway, that certain types of people use it. Or are there certain messages that appeal to certain types of people within the countries? I was wondering that because I've been working on a project with some colleagues in Croatia, and alongside the sort of attacks on Zelensky, etc., there's also a sense of Russia trying to promote itself as the protector of conservative values, the Orthodox Church, the traditional family values, the non-liberal, non-EU society. So I wondered if that was coming through in some of your work.
Yeah, of course we have these narratives about the traditional values. I would categorize these as implicitly political content, but of course the Kremlin's communication at other levels is permeated by this type of content, you know, criticizing Western or lambasting Western Europe for their positive attitudes towards the LGBT movement. Yeah, so that's very visible. And yeah, Julia, do you want to add something in terms of, I guess in terms of what users are attracted by these messages? We cannot tell it yet. You know, we potentially can look at the data, but it's very difficult to identify user groups. Julia, do you want to add something?
Yeah, so we downloaded the user data, and there was no so far based on our analysis, we didn't find any difference in demographics, but one has to add that VKontakte is also kind of a specific platform. It's the most popular platform in Russia, but I think most news consumption is mostly happening on Telegram now. For example, this is what is often said, also what we find in current research. And also, what did I want to say? Yeah, I mean, we have the user data. We will further analyze if there are specific audience in the directions that you just mentioned. Yeah, I guess this is so far what we can say.
Yeah. Please feel free to ask any questions also about basics. You know, we know that this is a kind of topic that very many people don't know so much about. Yeah.
We'll go on to Katie, please.
Thank you so much for this presentation. Yeah, I was admiring the little figures in the background behind which seemed quite relevant to the discussion, especially how political communication can take all sorts of forms. So I just wanted to ask a bit more about the nature of the humour or the ridicule and mocking. And you showed some really interesting examples there. And are there particular, I wondered if you'd looked in detail at the role of humour in particular, and who the targets are, what the nature of that kind of humour is, whether it is very dark and nasty, as you've already kind of hinted at. But is there more, you know, have you in any way kind of analysed the different types of humour and how this plays a role in the political content?
No, actually, we haven't analyzed this, but I think it's an immensely important topic, you know, both in my feeling, I think it's both in terms of conveying propaganda message, effective propaganda messages, and then also in countering propaganda. I mean, there are a couple of Ukrainian accounts like these Navo fellows that count or dot Putin, you know, and they are so. I think it's a very effective and underestimated tool in countering propaganda but also on the other side, you know, in conveying propaganda. Because if you look at the humor that I presented, it's essentially all these messages are very explicitly political. You know, you can say the same thing in a factual statement. If you look at the map of Poland, the factual statement is Poland has plans to attack Ukraine and conquer Ukraine. So it's rather explicit to show this map, but it deflects responsibility. It leaves the things open. It still plants the frame. I mean, people consume it, you know, so you have huge audiences by comparison with the news. So I think it's immensely important, because I mean, people say that political communication goes on Telegram, but if you look at these entertainment audiences on VK, they are huge, and above all, this is people that avoid the classic news. You know, these people in Russia, I guess we know that a lot of people intentionally avoid classic news outlets because they say this is propaganda. I'm apolitical. I cannot influence the situation anyway, so I want to isolate myself from it. But then they still get the key messages through the entertainment accounts. And another point is that on VK, we do not know how the algorithm works. So the algorithm is under full control of the Kremlin. So we can assume that they can change the algorithm anytime. They know all the types of user data they can gather through a social network. So they basically have all types of information about the users, and they can decide to kind of put some of these entertainment channels or all messages that contain the keyword Putin up in the feed. Mm-hmm. So they can rather easily adjust the level of propaganda they need, you know, and they can put it in a sleeping mode for some time, and in times of crisis, they can then play the more propaganda in the accounts of people. So this is all. It also helps, these entertainment accounts also help to open up communication channels and build trust with their audiences, because this is the entertainment account that you follow for years. And all of a sudden it starts posting more and more political content in times of crisis. So you have, I think it is characteristic of contemporary Russia that you have much more control about all aspects of the political, all elements of the political communication landscape. You know, you operate the accounts, you operate the algorithm, you operate the experts, you operate the media. I mean, it's the propaganda aspect of it is, as I would put it, the communication is largely monopolized in the hand of the Kremlin. Yeah.
And you were saying as well, like the patriotism as one of the themes, and I wondered, because they're quite visually striking as well, the examples you used, whether you noticed like certain symbols and that resonate, that are used in a recurrent manner.
Yeah, there are a couple of symbols. I mean, there's this St. George's ribbon, then there is this Z symbol for the war. These are probably the most widely known images, but there are a couple of others that are more nuanced that probably less people know. But symbols are very, very important. Yeah.
I'll use my privilege to ask another question, if I may, as well. I was really interested in this paper that you mentioned with the different understandings of truth that Russians in Germany displayed. And it speaks very closely to the study that I'm doing at the moment, where I'm finding that some of the more sort of objective types of truth that are offered by politicians to citizens in the UK as well are not hitting home or landing very well, because people can't connect their experience of reality to a statistical data point or a sort of more scientific representation of reality. So I think it's something that we would see in a broader sample as well, beyond sort of Russians. I think is something that's very relevant to Western societies as well, and the disconnect that we're finding in terms of polarization and disconnect between citizens and public representatives. But I was also wondering whether you could connect it to the study that you were just talking about. So is there a connection between these different understandings of truth and factual versus entertaining content, or between them and the implicit or explicit political content? So basically, I guess I'm asking whether there's an attempt by the producers of this entertainment content to cultivate a particular, more emotionally based form of truth, or to influence people's factual understanding of reality through other forms of truth.
Yeah, first of all, I mean, I can share this truth paper if you're interested.
That would be great. Yes, I'd very much like to read it.
And I think parts of the result are transferable to Western fringe audiences, or also to general audiences, because not for all people truth is related to finding evidence, but it's also related to emotions, or to simply believe somebody. I mean, the specific situation for Russian speakers abroad is that they have access to both the media of their host country, and at the same time they have access to the media of their home country, you know, which because they speak two languages. And the media of their home country frequently disseminates anti-democratic ideologies, you know, and seeks to destabilize their host society. Plus, the Kremlin targets them specifically. You know, they consider them as compatriots, and they have specific programs of repatriation, of helping them with discrimination, and so on. So there are some specifics to this group, but some other parts are transferable to the Western audience, and some parts are also transferable to the Russian audience. And I guess what has been often said is that in some sense, Russia is not interested in establishing the truth about its claims. Also domestically, the Kremlin is not interested in, establishing the truth about the version of an event, but rather spreading confusion by disseminating multiple narratives. I guess this is also a basic pattern. And I think we find it also in their VK accounts. And then, of course, I think much goes through emotions, particularly in entertainment, in jokes. I mean, they appeal probably to these emotional understandings of truth. Do you want to add something, Julia? No. I mean, if you want to add something from your observations, please feel free to jump in.
Yeah, maybe just one aspect that I think that there has been research also on that propaganda is most effective with the people who already believe in specific narratives. And I think this has been also found in context of Russian propaganda, and with the humor content that has been shown and like the specific elements, symbols, I think the people that are attracted most are the ones who live in this world. I mean, they have to have they have to know this world, they have to know what the symbol means. And I guess this is special to some of the Russian speakers living abroad, as well, because obviously people who are not connected with the culture, who don't, well, have never consumed or have never watched or read Russian propaganda narratives, they probably won't find it funny, or they won't experience that emotion. So definitely the humor is kind of in line with the narratives that have been already presented by extant research and what we find in television, which probably also adds to the coordination aspect that Florian was talking about. But yeah, I think we will have to look closer into it to add more details to this.
I'm wondering if that's also the draw for people is also partly to do with this sense of exclusivity of the construction of a community through the use of these symbols that only certain people know what mean, and jokes that only certain people get, that makes you feel part of that in-group.
Yeah, especially I think when you're kind of isolated with your views or with your worldview in another country where everyone seems to support Ukraine, and the German media is supporting Ukraine, and yeah, but you think that it's not quite that easy, and it's not black and white, and yeah.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah.
Do we have any other questions? Otherwise, I'll ask a last very broad question, which you can take as you like, Florian, but I'm just wondering if when you're running a large scale, very long-term project like this, what do you do when a war breaks out? And did you change direction, or sort of specify a different part of the program in a particular way, or just observe particular shifts in the content that you were looking at that might be interesting to note?
Yeah, I had to write an amendment, to be honest. You know, so the ERC, they have a, when you apply for ERC grant, you have to deliver a work program, and they are rather, I mean, it's rather closely connected what you have to deliver in kind of deliverables, you know, and if you can't do, for instance, we planned surveys in Belarus, and it just for the political situation, it was no longer possible to implement the method, in my view. And because I think, in my view, surveys are very problematic in present day Russia, and I'm not really sure how far they are valid. And yeah, so I had to write an amendment, but I envisaged these difficulties in the structure of the grant project. So typically, if I design projects on Russia, I do separate modules, you know, so, and none of them is consecutive. So if one fails, then you always can supplement it with another. And I write so as risk mitigation strategies. And if a project fails, then you can say, okay, I envisaged this, I mean, and I can do another project. I think the same is true also for social networking sites and this API, the type of, in the sense that API access vary. I mean, if you look at what you could do with Twitter data 2 years ago and what you can do now, it's very different. So usually, if I write a project proposal on that is based on API data, then I would probably do the same and say, you know, if it's closed, then do something else. But it was, you know, it was a great effort to design these things, because I actually had to undergo a re-review. So I had to rewrite parts of the project, and it was re-reviewed, which was a kind of unpleasant situation due to the war. And it took me a lot of time and resources to implement this administrative or grant proposal writing.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
this is
Yeah, no, I've just had to do exactly the same thing because of Twitter with my project. So yeah, I'm very sympathetic.
Yeah, good. That's probably true.
Thank you so much, Florian. This has been so interesting, and thank you, Julia. Really, really exciting study. And thanks for stepping into PSA MPG. I think it's been really interesting for everyone. Hopefully, we'll see you in Leeds one day.
Yeah, thank you very much for the invitation, and
Thanks
thank you very
everyone
much
for coming.
for the talk. Bye bye.
Thank you, Florian. Thank you, Julia. Great
Bye-bye.
presentation. Thank you.
Bye bye.
Thank you. Bye bye.